Shadow Hack. Chapter 461 Seeing Qianxue again. Who? Li Yunmu, who was pretending to be Lin Qingyang, asked in a deep voice with a hint of anger. Elder brother Lin, it's me. I heard that you returned and rushed over to see you. A young woman's concerned voice came from behind the door. I'm at a critical moment in cultivation, so I won't come out, Li Yunmu said without thinking much about it. At the same time, the figure of a young woman with the surname Ting Ting and all the information related to her appeared in his mind. Lu Ting Ting, that should be her? Li Yunmu shook his head with a feeling of vexation. An had previously informed him about all the matters which he needed to pay attention when he substituted for Lin Qingyang. The only person whom he had to be cautious of was this Lu Ting Ting. This was because she was the only person in Profound South Sect who had any contact with Lin Qingyang. She was infatuated with him and had been chasing him for the past 3 years without being discouraged by his refusals. If she had been any other ordinary disciple, it would have been dealt with without any problem. However, the point was that this Lu Ting Ting was the daughter of the master of Profound South Sect. Because of that, even if the original Lin Qingyang was hatefully arrogant and possessed the first room in the 21st region, he was still unable to get rid of her. The other parties seemed to have understood the importance of Lin Qingyang being at a critical point in his cultivation because the knocking stopped. Li Yunmu didn't care much about it and forgot about it. Whatever happened, he was only going to stay around for 2 more days. After the intersect competition, he would sneak into Origin God Sect. Then why would he have to bother about some sect master's daughter? Time kept passing while he was in seclusion. After 2 days, the entire Profound South Sect began to bustle with excitement. It looked as if the bitterly cold winter season had passed and all sorts of animals were coming out of hibernation. Li Yunmu was also among them. He finally came out of his room and began to quickly walk toward the plaza on the main peak in large strides. All the inner disciples of all 36 residential regions of Profound South Sect were doing the same. There were some disciples who had gone very far away while adventuring, but they had also hurried back. The intersect competition might not have anything to do with them, but they still didn't want to miss such an interesting day. Apart from witnessing fights between the most powerful inner disciples of the sect, they would also have the opportunity to watch people from second-tier or even first-tier powers in action. Reporting, second-tier sect, Flying Snow Mountain Sect has arrived. Li Yunmu had just arrived at the mountain peak when he heard an announcement being transferred from the bottom of the mountain to the top. When he turned his head around to look, he saw a group of women wearing snow-white clothes with just as white capes draped over them. The group of core disciples of Profound South Sect were enthusiastically welcoming them. Flying Snow Mountain Sect had sent 5 people this time. 4 of them were young beautiful women, which instantly attracted the gazes of the majority of male disciples of Profound South Sect like a magnet. In front of the newcomer group was a 30-year-old, middle-aged, but still attractive woman. She was probably an important elder of Flying Snow Mountain Sect. In the area around her, there was a small domain which was up at all times. As she moved, the several-meter area around filled with snow, even if it wasn't snowing in Profound South Sect. When Li Yunmu saw her from afar, his heart stopped for a moment. That woman was a sage flux expert. For the first time, he had seen a sage flux expert of the Origin world. He was slightly startled when he felt even colder when compared to when he had faced Battle Sage Vega. This sort of sensation filled Li Yunmu with a pressure as well as excitement which spread through his whole body. The Origin world's sage flux experts were truly too ferocious. He could only sense that the woman was a sage flux expert. Although he couldn't tell at which stage she was, it was certain that she wasn't weaker than the quasi-deities of Earth. It has to be known that Battle Sage Vega could easily be considered as one of the most powerful quasi-deities of Earth. Yet a second-tier sex elder in the Origin world could easily stand on equal level with her. At that instant, Li Yunmu finally understood the disparity of strength between the Origin world and the parallel planes. It was no wonder then that Underworld Serpent didn't care about his identity as a descender. However, this wasn't important. When Li Yunmu's attention gradually shifted to the four disciples standing on the side of the elder, he suddenly saw an extremely familiar figure. Qianxue. Li Yunmu almost couldn't stop himself from shouting out loud. At that moment, even if he had thousands of words, he still wouldn't have been able to describe his shock. According to logic, he should have been rejoicing on seeing an old comrade from his homeland, especially in the case of Qianxue. Although they weren't the best of friends, she was one of the few people from whom he'd felt no malicious intent. However, at that moment, Li Yunmu was impersonating Lin Qingyang and was afraid that she might expose him in front of everyone by accident. And sure enough, what he was afraid of did happen. Perhaps Li Yunmu's astonished gaze was too conspicuous, for Qianxue sensed someone watching her and slightly raised her chin, revealing a pair of cold eyes from beneath her snow-white cape. When her gaze fell upon Li Yunmu, it stayed there. She looked at him with a questioning gaze, full of doubt, but slowly it turned to normal. Qianxue, what happened? The senses of the female elder moving with her were extremely sharp, and she instantly discovered that Qianxue's breathing had slightly fluctuated. It's nothing. Just saw a childhood friend, Qianxue hurriedly answered. Haha, what a coincidence that we have encountered Qianxue's childhood sweetheart. The other three disciples couldn't help but tease her slightly. Qianxue was an extraordinary woman. She quickly removed the slight shock from her face and controlled her breathing while easily navigating through the teasing of her fellow disciples with a smile. The elder from the Flying Snow Mountain sect shot a gaze toward Li Yunmu, and he instantly felt as if his consciousness sea was about to explode. It filled to the brim with snow, which caused him to shiver uncontrollably. Frightening. This is the strength of a sage flux expert? Raging waves set off in Li Yunmu's heart. If he hadn't cultivated infant soul preservation obtained from Yeching, which strengthened his mortal soul and vitality until it far surpassed that of the ordinary people, he would have definitely frozen from just that one gaze. At that moment, Li Yunmu understood that the female elder's strength surpassed that of battle sage Vega. Your childhood friend isn't simple. Seeing that Li Yunmu hadn't frozen but had forcibly resisted, the female elder couldn't help but feel surprised. At that moment, the upper echelon of Profound South Sect, who had finally learned that an elder of Flying Snow Mountain Sect had arrived unexpectedly, sent the sect master as well as all the elders. The group of important people of Profound South Sect quickly made their way to welcome the newcomers. The group of women, including Qianxue, were like cranes in the flock of chicken. Under the fervent gazes of the disciples of Profound South Sect, they moved toward the main hall. The disparity between a third-tier and a second-tier sect was completely reflected at that moment. There was a bitter smile on Li Yunmu's face. Qianxue was truly unfathomable and extremely fortunate. On Earth, she had already possessed a three-sun heavenly world. After descending to the origin world, she unexpectedly broke through the norm and successfully infiltrated a second-tier sect unlike other descenders. Moreover, based on what happened, it seemed that her position in Flying Snow Mountain Sect wasn't low either. At that moment, Li Yunmu had a feeling that the intersect competition wouldn't go as smoothly as he had expected. Brother Qingyang, do you know someone from Flying Snow Mountain Sect? A soft and elegant voice entered Li Yunmu's ears from behind. Its tone was one of familiarity, and Li Yunmu complained in his heart Liu Tingting had come to find him once more. No, I don't, Li Yunmu replied in a deep voice without turning his head. He had been told that this was how Lin Qingyang treated this troublesome woman. All he hoped for then was that Liu Tingting wouldn't recognize him. Perhaps he could trick others, but Liu Tingting was quite familiar with Lin Qingyang, so he didn't have a lot of confidence in deceiving her. It really seemed like the day had been cursed. Li Yunmu felt like he'd attracted the attention of the goddess of misfortune somehow. Chapter 462 Low-Key Origin God Seconds. Hearing Li Yunmu's words, Liu Tingting was slightly startled. But she quickly pouted. I saw your reaction when you looked at that woman. Don't try to fool me. Li Yunmu naturally wouldn't entangle himself with the woman of the person he was impersonating. He didn't bother with her and quickly proceeded to the plaza. As time passed, one after another powers friendly with Profound South Sect continued to arrive. 3rd Tier North Whale Sect has arrived. 3rd Tier Hunshan Pavilion has arrived. 2nd Tier Devil Palace has arrived. On this day, Profound South Sect was bustling with noise and excitement. All the core disciples as well as important people of the sect were rushing around to welcome all the guests. Accurately speaking, not only was the Profound South Sect bustling with excitement today, but rather all the 3rd tier sects in the origin world were busy. Li Yunmu couldn't understand what sort of relationship existed between this world's 3rd tier sects and higher level powers. Why were they willing to send off the disciples they had nurtured with such excitement? Regardless of how he looked at it, it seemed like a loss of talent, and not only a slight one, but rather a disastrous one. However, all the 3rd tier powers of the origin world unanimously did this without sparing any effort. There was certainly a transaction of benefits involved here, but Li Yunmu didn't pay attention to them for the time being. After all, his main priority wasn't to thoroughly assimilate into the origin world. Because of that, he didn't have enough time to understand the many regulations of the origin world, unlike his followers Li Qinghong and Demon who understood more than him. He kept silently looking at all the important people of Profound South Sect who were busy welcoming an unending stream of guests pouring in. It could be seen that not just any higher tier power could send their people to absorb the disciples. Only those powers who had good relations with Profound South Sect were invited, which also included other 3rd tier sects. Before long, a large amount of people assembled in the plaza on the main peak, and at some point in time, the number of spectators crossed 10,000. Soon, the upper echelons of Profound South Sect made a rare decision of allowing all the outer disciples onto the main peak. Because of that, more and more disciples of Profound South Sect kept swarming to the main peak. Seeing the densely packed crowd, Li Yunmu was speechless. He was in only a 3rd tier power of the origin world, but the grandeur from the assembly of nearly 10,000 disciples was simply amazing. This scene clearly reflected that the population of the origin world was extremely enormous, to the point that the cultivators were as numerous as dogs and chickens in a sect. Finally, the last of the invited sects arrived. The Origin God sect, which was Li Yunmu's aim, had also showed up quietly. It had only sent 3 people, 1 old man and 2 very young disciples. One of the disciples was a man while the other was a woman, but both of their cultivations were in flux expert realm. From the presence of the 2 people, Li Yunmu could sense that it hadn't been long since they had started cultivating. Given their strength, Li Yunmu could easily crush them with 1 leg. But the energy fluctuations coming from their bodies startled him. What sort of energy fluctuations were those? They were somewhat familiar and pure. Only Li Yunmu, who had cultivated the same type of cultivation method, could clearly understand what sort of energy fluctuations were those. He was slightly startled by the fact that the young disciples of Origin God sect had cultivated a cultivation method similar to his meridian nurturing flux point technique. With this astonishing discovery, Li Yunmu instantly understood everything. No wonder then that a 2nd tier sect like Origin God sect caught the eye of Underground Serpent. If the 2 disciples hadn't been young and had just recently started cultivating, because of which they couldn't perfectly control their energy fluctuations, Li Yunmu wouldn't have discovered such an important secret. Origin God sect, this 2nd tier power, surprisingly hid such a secret. Now, not only Underground Serpent was paying close attention to this relatively low-pitch yet mysterious sect, but Li Yunmu was also filled with excitement toward it. He had recently discovered the peculiarity of the meridian nurturing flux point technique, but now he saw another cultivation method related to it. According to what he remembered, meridian nurturing flux point technique was only a broken part of an ancient secret technique. The real one had been composed of 5 parts in total: development of flux points, nurture of meridians, expansion of muscles, transformation of blood, and substitution of internal organs. Meridian nurturing flux point technique, which Li Yunmu had obtained, only had 2 parts: the ones about nurturing meridians and developing flux points. But even though he lacked the other three parts, Li Yunmu's flux energy strength had still went through the upper limit of the same level cultivators with 20 flux points yet to be opened. Apart from that, Li Yunmu's physical strength also far surpassed the required threshold for breaking through the Great Flux Expert realm. There were many other noticeable effects of meridian nurturing flux point technique too. From the above-mentioned facts, it could be clearly seen that this ancient god era's secret technique was the most remarkable and outstanding technique cultivated by Li Yunmu without any need to make a comparison. Could Origin God Sect possesses one of the remaining three parts then? Or perhaps it had all three of them. For a while, Li Yunmu's eyes began to shine brightly. However, he would have never expected that although he had been looking at Origin God Sect without anything extraordinary in his gaze, the slight excitement he revealed carelessly was caught by Lu Tingting, who had been paying close attention to him. Bang! 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 At that moment, the enormous clock began to ring loudly, signifying the start of the tournament. Li Yunmu, who had been standing in the region assigned for the 21st residential region, could see that almost all of the inner disciples of the residential regions had rushed over, apart from a few who were outside the sect. Of the 300 people of 21st residential region, more than 280 had arrived. The gazes of all these people were on Li Yunmu as well as other powerful people who occupied the first 10 rooms. The same scene was playing out in the spectator regions of the other 35 residential regions. Each of them had formed their own factions, and the front 10 people were their hope in the day's battles. Chapter 463 Absolute Defense appears again. Profound South Sect had 6 more residential regions for inner disciples compared to Blue Moon Sect. Each region still had the upper limit of 300 disciples, and only the top 10 most powerful people of each region could participate in the battle. Soon, an important figure of Profound South Sect announced the rewards for particular positions obtained in the intersect battle, following the conventions of previous years. There were 360 people participating in the battle in total, but the sect provided rewards only for the first 30 positions. The first place would be rewarded with 30,000 contribution points. Second place would receive 20,000 contribution points. Third place would receive 10,000 contribution points. Fourth to 10th place would receive 5,000 contribution points each. 11th to 20th place would receive 3,000 contribution points each. 21st to 30th place would receive 1,000 contribution points each. Most of the elite disciples of the sect were happy as long as they entered the first 20 places, since then they would obtain 10 flux binding pills. After that, as long as their physical strength crossed the threshold, they could already be considered as half a step into the Great Flux Expert realm with the large amount of contribution points at their disposal. This was an opportunity which Li Yunmu couldn't miss. His reserves of contribution points had been depleting quickly. If he couldn't ensure a continuous supply of flux binding pills for opening the remaining 20 flux points, it would take him a long time to reach the Great Circle by relying on absorbing the flux energy scattered in the world. Thus, his gaze was on the first prize. Soon, the intersect battles began. The intersect battles of the Origin world were also known as tier-jumping battles. Why were they called battles and not competition? The answer was very simple. Because the ruthlessness and cruelty of those battles far surpassed any martial competition and was similar to what could be seen in real wars. Unless one was completely certain that they could deal with the enemy easily, they should admit defeat. Otherwise, they would be crushed or could even get killed in the next battle. The reason behind this sort of savage battle was probably the enormous amount of cultivators in the Origin world. 10 elevated stages had been built long ago by Profound South Sect. The point worth mentioning was the material used to create them, which were the ocean rocks from the deep sea region. They had borne the enormous pressure several thousand meters under the surface for several years and were extremely sturdy. Even if a great flux expert launched an attack with their full strength, it would be very difficult to break the stage built using more than 10 ocean rocks. Soon, the upper echelons of Profound South Sect began to pull out lottery tickets and called participants for each stage. In no time, Li Yunmu's name was pulled out for the 7th stage. Brother Qingyang, be a little careful. Your opponent is Sinister Fiend Tiger, and he is very powerful. He is ranked 5th in the 3rd residential region, and he's been preparing for 2 years for this tier-jumping battle. Lu Tingting, who stood behind him, quickly supplied some information about his opponent. But Li Yunmu didn't hesitate and leaped onto the 7th stage. Hey, you're 21st residential region's first-ranked Lin Qingyang? I'm sorry, but your luck ran out the moment you encountered me. Even if the daughter of the sect master fancies you, accept your death now. Sinister Fiend Tiger was as sinister and ruthless as his name. The moment after trash talking, he fiercely stamped his leg on the ground and rushed toward Li Yunmu. Without any preamble, he launched a fist toward Li Yunmu's vital part. The system had already scanned Sinister Fiend Tiger's strength by then. His flux energy strength was around 167 points while his physical strength was 49 oxen. From this, it seemed that on the basis of strength, Profound South Sect was somewhat more powerful than Blue Moon Sect, even if both of them were 3rd-tier sects. The man's flux energy strength of 167 points was extremely close to the upper limit of 180 points. Sinister Fiend Tiger probably still had to open 3 or 4 flux points. His fist utilized an extremely high-level explosive fist technique. It used an enormous amount of physical strength and turned it into momentum, after which flux energy was used to increase the explosiveness of the attack. This attack's explosive might definitely far surpass the physical or flux energy strength of Sinister Fiend Tiger by several folds. It thus was the reason why Li Yunmu's absolute defense lost its effectiveness in front of flux experts. The flux experts of the origin world combined their flux energy and explosive physical strength to attack, which far surpassed the defensive capability of an opponent on the same level. Fluxers relied only on their flux energy to attack, which although wasn't weak but definitely didn't have the sort of explosive character that flux experts gained from combining physical strength and flux energy to attack. This sort of combined attack far surpassed their body's resisting ability. Offensive strength far surpassed any defenses, and it was the main characteristic of the flux experts of the origin world. As a result, it wasn't rare for late-stage or even peak-stage flux experts to be accidentally killed by mid-stage flux experts. The reason behind it was that the instant a fight began between a mid-stage flux expert and a late-stage flux expert, the mid-stage flux expert would instantly erupt with an explosive attack which could kill a late-stage flux expert easily. However, Li Yunmu had decided to break this convention. He indifferently looked at Sinister Fiend Tiger, and when the terrifying fist arrived, he didn't dodge or avoid it, but instead remained standing motionlessly like a deer in front of headlights. Bang! It was the sound of an enormous power crashing directly against flesh and bone. Without moving, Li Yunmu said just 2 words, "Too weak." Impossible. Sinister Fiend Tiger fiercely shook his head and began to frantically attack Li Yunmu. One fist after another heavily smashed against his body. Bang, 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 bang. The sounds of fists hitting flesh filled the entire plaza. Who is he? Our 8-god sect wants him. After seeing Li Yunmu smash the common knowledge about the same realm's defense, an elder of a 2nd-tier sect immediately stood up. Without thinking much, he instantly declared the intention of the 8-god sect whom he represented. His words were like thunderbolts on the ears of several tens of thousands of spectators. Since the time they had entered the sect, they had never seen a 2nd-tier sect willing to take in a person like that. However, once the elder of 8-god sect opened his mouth, an even more outrageous affair happened behind the stage. The representatives of other 2nd-tier powers also simultaneously spoke up. This person, I want. I want. My 1000 Underworld sect also wants. My Dragon Mountain also wants him. Chapter 464 Dismissal. Several representatives of 2nd-tier sects expressed their intentions simultaneously without waiting to think about it, rushing to recruit Li Yunmu, no, Lin Qingyang, into their sect. The upper echelons of Profound South Sect were dumbfounded upon seeing this situation. In the previous years, when had such an event occurred? Which of the second-tier sects wasn't extremely arrogant? Even if they saw an outstanding disciple with great potential, they still waited until the final moment when the competition had already been finished before considering who they should recruit into their sects. Yet at that moment, it was still unknown whether Li Yunmu would win his first battle, let alone if he'd get into the top 10. Still, the second-tier sects had made their decision. However, Li Yunmu's brows wrinkled subconsciously. Even though there were 7 second-tier sects trying to recruit him, the elder of the Origin God sect still hadn't expressed any such intention. Could it be that the formidable combat prowess and hidden potential displayed by him still couldn't catch the eyes of the Origin God sect? That was quite problematic for him. Even if he had 7 or 8 second-tier sects trying to recruit him, how could Li Yunmu take interest in ordinary second-tier powers? In truth, it was considered extremely amazing for an ordinary cultivator to join a second-tier sect, but this wasn't Li Yunmu's goal. If being honest, he was infinitely close to becoming a member of a first-tier power, Underground Serpent, and just needed to enter the Origin God sect to accomplish it. Impossible. How could your physical body be so tyrannical? What sort of body tempering method have you cultivated? Sinister Fiend Tiger continued launching one punch after another against Li Yunmu's chest. However, his terrifying physical and flux energy strength were unable to cause the least bit of injury to Li Yunmu. Seeing this, even the 10,000s of spectators were about to consider that Sinister Fiend Tiger was actually weak. But how could any person that could obtain the qualifications to participate in the tier-jumping battle be weak? Naturally the answer was no, especially when considering Sinister Fiend Tiger, who was the 5th-ranked person of the 3rd residential region. Because of that, everyone gazed at Li Yunmu, oh no, Lin Qingyang, and felt a chill run down their backs. What sort of lucky recounter could have Lin Qingyang had run into while tempering himself in the wilderness for the past 2 years? Time to end this farce. Li Yunmu's attention wasn't focused on his opponent. His brows remained wrinkled as he watched Origin God sect not expressing any intention to recruit him. He extended his hand and casually caught Sinister Fiend Tiger's punch. He then used some power and easily stopped the other's figure, which was moving at a fast pace, and pulled it toward himself. After it, Li Yunmu punched him, casually hitting the chest of Sinister Fiend Tiger. Bang! Li Yunmu's casual punch had easily shattered Sinister Fiend Tiger's body protecting flux energy cover, after which it landed on his body. Upon being hit by it, Sinister Fiend Tiger was blown away from the stage like an artillery shell. The sudden change on the stage caused countless spectators sitting on the platform as well as below it to go completely silent, to the extent that even the sound of a dropped pin could be heard. After a good while, the sect master of Profound South Sect took a sip of water to wet his parched throat and formally announced that Lin Qingyang was the winner of the battle on the 7th stage. As Li Yunmu went down the stage, a person from the upper echelons of Profound South Sect came and politely asked Li Yunmu about his choice. They wanted to know which of the 7 sects which had expressed their interest in recruiting him he wanted to join. Li Yunmu naturally couldn't directly express that he only wanted to join Origin God sect. Otherwise, even with this smallest clue, his mission from Underground Serpent might get exposed. He shook his head and asked the person to wait and not be so anxious. His casual tone shocked the person from the upper echelons of Profound South Sect. There were 7 second-tier sects taking the initiative to recruit him, but this Lin Qingyang's casual tone seemed to imply that he didn't care about it one bit. If he had given this reply a few moments ago, he would have definitely been taught a good lesson for being a youngster who wants to bite more than he could chew. But now the messenger didn't dare, because the strength displayed by Li Yunmu made it clear that he was bound to enter a second-tier sect in the future. On top of that, he would certainly obtain an important position. Li Yunmu might not have cared about it, but after he walked down the stage, his status had greatly changed in the eyes of those who knew him as well as those who didn't know him. He didn't pay it any attention, however. Profound South Sect? Whether it was Profound South Sect or the previous Blue Moon Sect, they were just small ponds which couldn't hold a big fish like him. From the beginning, he had no intention to stay for more than a few days. After them, perhaps he would even forget about this springboard. This was the reason why he hadn't used much force against Sinister Fiend Tiger. After the battle concluded, he returned to the area allocated to 21st Region and sat down cross-legged with his eyes closed and didn't pay attention to anything else. However, his battle had filled the participants of Profound South Sect with fear. Just now, he didn't use any flux energy. Yes, he blew away Sinister Fiend Tiger with a casual punch. His physical strength has already reached an astonishing level. Renfeng, I wonder how much assurance do you have in winning now? Not far from Li Yunmu, in the area allocated to the first residential region, were the people who had more than oldest qualifications to participate in the battles happening right now. Whether based on cultivation or strength, they were the strongest in Profound South Sect. And Renfeng was the first-ranked person of the first residential region. It wouldn't be outrageous to say that the majority of people in the sect considered him as the most powerful person not just in the first region, but in the whole sect. Renfeng was actually the future star of Profound South Sect. His every action was bound to be extraordinary, but today, all his thunder had been stolen by Li Yunmu. I don't know. This person is too tyrannical. I could sense his dismissal toward us, and it's not disdain, but rather genuine lack of care for our existence. After witnessing Li Yunmu's battle, Renfeng was stunned. After someone questioned him, he began to speak of the other, but his stunned expression quickly turned into one of ferociousness. But regardless of whatever lucky encounter he had in the past 2 years, I, Renfeng, will let him know that he can dismiss everyone, but dismissing me is an unforgivable crime. Soon, it was Renfeng's turn to go on stage. Since he was the publicly acknowledged most powerful person of the sect, as soon as he stepped on the stage, the eyes of many second-tier sects focused on him. However, no one expected that after stepping on the stage, he would calmly start to speak without waiting for his opponent to arrive. Sect Master, as I see it, me and Lin Qingyang don't need to battle with others. Just let us fight each other to decide the first and second positions. Renfeng's rude suggestion caused a commotion on the platforms as well as below them. Chapter 465 What sort of toys are those? Renfeng's rude suggestion immediately infuriated all the participants, but none of them dared to raise any objections. The person behind the request was Renfeng, after all. He was the publicly acknowledged most powerful flux expert in the entire Profound South Sect. In fact, he was viewed as the disciple with most potential in the last 100 years of Profound South Sect and someone who was quite likely to enter a first-rate power. Because of such great potential, he had become used to receiving special treatment. If it had been any other person except him on the stage raising such a request, he probably would have been kicked out of Profound South Sect straight away. Yet the upper echelon of Profound South Sect were still regretting it. It has to be known that Renfeng's success in the future would gain many benefits for Profound South Sect too. The sect master of Profound South Sect, who was Liu Tingting's father, was put into an embarrassing position. He looked at Renfeng with creased brows and an ugly expression, hoping that the man would take the big picture into consideration and take back his words. Clap, clap, clap. While the sect master of Profound South Sect was feeling embarrassed, someone began to clap on the guest platform. Pretty good, old Nan, seems like this disciple of yours has quite a personality. You don't need to be embarrassed. In my opinion, you should agree to his suggestion. Strong always have the privilege, even if he is truly weak right now. Everyone turned to look at the person who had spoken such words and found that it was the senior from Flying Snow Mountain Sect. She was one of the few sage flux experts who had come today. Like that, the sect master of Profound South Sect got a chance to save his face with the help of her words. The vice sect master, who quickly understood the intentions of the upper echelon, stood up and declared, "All right, Lin Qingyang, you come on the stage." Today our profound South sect will make an exception and decide the first and second ranks straight away. Naturally, if any participant thinks that Renfeng and Lin Qingyang don't have the qualifications to fight for the first and second positions, they can challenge them before the great battle. His declaration was quite rigorous, without any loopholes, and gave every participant a chance to fight for the first place if they felt like it. Although it was unfair to they, no one was stupid. The only people who could force the sect to change their normal proceedings were only Renfeng or Lin Qingyang. The others didn't have such privilege. On top of that, they clearly understood that whether it was Renfeng or Lin Qingyang, their strength had already reached the level where other flux experts of profound South sect couldn't challenge them. Li Yunmu was surprised by the change, but he didn't care much for it. At least now he wouldn't have to sit around all day waiting for a few hundred people to complete their turns. Thus, after a short silence, he didn't decline and leaped onto the stage. As he did so, he shot a gaze toward the elder of Flying Snow Mountain sect while feigning carelessness. In her expression, he could see that what he had guessed with his keen sense was indeed correct. A hint of maliciousness toward him had taken seed in her heart. Flying Snow Mountain sect was a woman-only sect, and for the past 2,000 years, this rule hadn't been broken. Yet its elder had suddenly stood up to show her support for Renfeng's willful request. Li Yunmu had no illusions that it was because she wanted to recruit Renfeng. Did she have some ulterior motive and want to find trouble for him? Or was she trying to test his strength using Renfeng? But why would she do any of that? For Qianxue? Did she want to eliminate a nobody like him? My luck today is truly dogshit. Li Yunmu edged the face of the female elder into his memory, but didn't say anything and indifferently looked away from her to the stage. His gaze landed on Renfeng, who was bursting with battle intent. He was Profound Heaven Sect's most powerful inner disciple. Even if Li Yunmu had secluded himself for the past 2 days and hadn't paid any attention to the matters of sect, he had still heard of Renfeng's name when passing ordinary disciples. If it had been 3 months ago, such a guy would have been like a high mountain to him, but now, Li Yunmu couldn't be bothered to pay him any attention. Lin Qingyang, you're pretty good. Although I don't know what you've experienced in the past 2 years, the most powerful flux expert of Profound South Sect is me. You can only satisfy yourself with second place. While speaking, Renfeng's presence became increasingly more intense. His flux energy erupted forth and congealed together to form matter, creating a layer of energy armor around his body. Flux energy armor. That's right, seems like the first-ranked inner disciple of Profound South Sect isn't just all talk. Just based on this fact, this youngster has the qualifications to make us look at him in a new light. All the elders representing the third-tier sects nodded simultaneously, revealing a hint of appreciation in their eyes. As for the elders of the second-tier sects, their loathing of Renfeng because of his earlier actions greatly eased. They didn't reject or oppose this uncontrollable and willful disciple. They didn't dislike and loathe him since he wasn't someone who didn't have any strength while believing himself to be above others. After all the powerhouses had such proud and arrogant nature even before they gained such titles. All of them had unique characteristics, and Renfeng's actions received their approval. He had been able to congeal his flux energy as substance even before opening the Great Circle and all flux points, which resulted in a flux armor materializing around him. Although it wasn't comparable to the flux energy armor of great flux experts, the accomplishment of it alone confirmed that his cultivation was extremely consolidated and pure. Besides that, he couldn't have accomplished it without extremely high perception and fine control over flux energy. The number of flux experts who could accomplish this didn't go above 100 in the whole world, but could that still be considered extremely rare? There were around 100 such people after all. It was obvious since the number of inner disciples in a third-tier sect in the origin world was extremely high. However, Li Yunmu didn't feel anything toward the enemy's accomplishments. In fact, his mental state had long changed by a lot. Given that he possessed the H.A.C.K system, his mentality had become identical to that of the system. What realm, what enormous talent and perception, potential, all of them were just empty words. Regardless of what high potential a person had, they couldn't be more formidable than the system in his hand. He didn't need anything besides the knowledge that his present strength far surpassed that of Renfeng. In front of absolute strength, everything was futile. Chapter 466 Peak Level Cross-Cover Armor. Come. Compared to Renfeng's unending stream of words before battle, Li Yunmu said only one word and simply gestured at him with his hand. You think too highly of yourself and will have to pay the price for it. Li Yunmu's indifferent words enraged his opponent. Renfeng made a grab in the air, and a fierce battle spear appeared in his hand. I want to see whether your tortoise shell is stronger or if my heavenly wolf spear is sharper. 8 heavenly wolf steps, break for me. Instantly, Renfeng rushed over in small, quick steps according to a special rhythm. With each step, the intense pressure emitting from his body increased by another notch. The flux energy moving around his body began to congeal until it firmly formed over the top of Heavenly Wolf Spear. When he completed the 7 steps, above his Heavenly Wolf Spear, an astral tip formed. It seemed to be pulling all the light in the vicinity toward itself. Upon seeing that, even Li Yunmu couldn't help but feel a chill go down his spine. Heavens, Renfeng has surprisingly cultivated 8 Heavenly Wolf steps to the 7th step. Many of the fellow disciples who understood Renfeng's unique skill couldn't help but mumble to themselves while watching what was happening on the stage. Not that long ago, Renfeng could only reach the 6th step, but even at that time, no inner disciple of profound South Sect could endure the destructive power of his 8 Heavenly Wolf steps. And today, he had unleashed the 7th step of Heavenly Wolf. With that, what sort of terrifying power would it reveal? At this instant, everyone knew that Renfeng's strength was for real, and he was about to utilize his most powerful flux battle skill. As for Li Yunmu, he felt an extremely familiar sensation from 8 Heavenly Wolf steps. Isn't it the same as Chao Tian 8 steps? It's the same flux battle skill with only a slightly different effect. The A-grade flux skill Chao Tian 8 steps acquired by Li Yunmu was created only based on utilization of flux energy. 8 Heavenly Wolf steps used by Renfeng, however, were actually a combination of Chao Tian 8 steps flux energy with physical strength. They had also been further modified for a specialized weapon. In simple terms, Renfeng's 8 Heavenly Wolf steps were many times more formidable than Chao Tian 8 steps. On top of that, it was an even more comprehensive technique. Yet it was still based on the same principle as Chao Tian 8 steps. Although Li Yunmu had bestowed Chao Tian 8 steps to ape gods to cultivate before, he had learned and upgraded it to 30th level with ability points for himself as well. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that even though he didn't have a surplus of anything right now, he didn't lack ability points. Thus, his understanding of 8 Heavenly Wolf steps wasn't the least bit lower than compared to that of Renfeng. It was just that Li Yunmu wasn't the same as he was half a month ago. Back then, had been forced to disappear when chased by 13 core disciples, but now, his situation had changed greatly. First of all, Li Yunmu's physical strength had went up greatly, from 53 oxen to 105. With that, regardless of whether it was his physical body's defense or attack power, both of them had increased by several folds. This was the reason why Li Yunmu had dared to receive the full strength attack from Sinister Fiend Tiger. It was all because of the increase in his physical strength. His corporeal body's power had increased greatly, which had caused his Great Sun Tyrant body to involuntarily break through the minor threshold realm and rise to another level. With that, Li Yunmu's flesh truly reflected the characteristics of a tyrannical body. After all, when the system made a series of complicated simulations, the final result was that it would be very difficult for any flux expert to break through Admiralty cover and Tyrant body's defense. This was the reason why a flux expert like Sinister Fiend Tiger, who was extremely close to reaching the peak stage, still couldn't cause the slightest damage to Li Yunmu. But Renfeng had some mysterious background and cultivated an extremely superior flux skill. This skill combined with the extraordinary heavenly wolf spear in his hand made Li Yunmu sense a hint of coldness even after covering his tyrant body with admiralty cover. Clearly, Renfeng was among the few flux experts that the system had warned him about. It had said that there should exist some who could break his admiralty cover and tyrant body. However, Li Yunmu had experienced being hunted by Blue Moon Sect, so how could his progress be so little? The next instant, Li Yunmu half squatted down and released a muffled roar. Instantly, his black clothes were torn to shreds by his tyrannical physical body, revealing an armor formed of blocks of meat cubes. Cross-cover armor? Isn't this the peak-level cross-cover armor? Sitting on top of the platform, an elder of a second-tier sect called out the cultivation method cultivated by Li Yunmu with infinite bewilderment. In reality, there were many categories of defensive cultivation methods in the world, but among them, there were few which could actually allow a cultivator's body to congeal flesh armor. On top of that, there weren't many people who could cultivate a limit-breaking method to the peak either. Not to mention that the number of people who could train cross-cover armor to the point of congealing the flesh armor was even smaller. This was because those who cultivated this cultivation method needed to temper their body day after day, month after month for several years. Very few people had the willpower to continue tempering themselves for such a long time, let alone to cultivate it to the point of creating a flesh armor. But now, such a person had appeared. After learning his lesson from being hunted by Blue Moon Sect, Li Yunmu had used several thousand ability points to cultivate cross-cover armor given to him by Wang Yan. With them, he had upgraded this cultivation method to the 99th level and had formed the flesh armor. Each of the flesh cubes was extremely sturdy and emitted a defensive energy which showed up when one's flesh attained extremely formidable vitality as well as extremely robust physical defense. Chapter 467 Sect Masters Obstruction. Those who weren't too knowledgeable would only see Li Yunmu's flesh turning into square-shaped blocks forming flesh armor, but there were also those who knew the facts about the heaven-defying defense of cross-cover armor. As the cultivator's strength became more formidable, their cross-cover armor would become more concentrated, and the size of square blocks would become even smaller. When they became no larger than dust, no longer noticeable by the ordinary eyes, the technique would have reached its pinnacle. But this was only something people thought, because since the ancient times, there was no record of a human achieving this step. Even those who had entered deity realm hadn't been able to accomplish it. As for Li Yunmu, although he had been able to cultivate this limit-breaking cultivation method to the peak, the square blocks on his skin were as large as matchboxes due to the limits of his flesh. He was still far from attaining the legendary size of dust particles. Clearly, cross-cover armor was the type of cultivation method which reinforced one's defense as their physical strength increased. The reason why Li Yunmu hadn't cultivated it and instead bestowed it onto the ape gods was not because he underestimated this limit-breaking cultivation method, but because his physical strength hadn't been sufficiently formidable at that time. Because of that, the benefits he would have obtained from investment in it wouldn't have been worth it. But were different since then. With his strength of 105 oxen, he finally had enough vitality to cultivate this cultivation method, and its effect would be completely displayed. When Li Yunmu finally displayed it, he presented the formidable power of a cultivation method which he had cultivated to the peak. At that moment not only profound South Sect's disciples sitting below the stage, but even the powerhouses sitting on top of the platform were also stupefied. The next instant, the blocks of flesh all over his body quickly hardened. Then, one after another, black patterns appeared on the squares. After careful observation, everyone discovered that the black patterns were flickering faintly. They are the patterns signifying Great Circle according to legends. Something like this only shows up when an extremely high-level cultivation method is cultivated to the upper limit. But how could a 20-year-something youth trigger this phenomenon? This sort of impossible situation could be considered a miracle, but at this moment, people didn't have the time to think about it. That was because Renfeng had ruthlessly thrust his heavenly wolf spear toward Li Yunmu's chest like a powerful drill. It's a pretty good flux skill, but unfortunately you can only control it up to the 7th step. If you could use at least half of the maximum 36 steps, then perhaps you might have been able to penetrate my defense. Li Yunmu bent slightly and reached for the tip of Renfeng's heavenly wolf spear. If some other flux expert had dared to catch its tip with bare hands, their hand would have been cut straight away. However, Li Yunmu in his inhuman state, caught the spear aimed toward his chest with bare hands. After that, the power of 105 oxen erupted from him. Renfeng could sense an intense power flowing through his weapon before he was blown away along with his spear. When he stood up and stabilized himself, he discovered that he had been tossed off the stage by Li Yunmu. The entire venue went silent. At that moment, Li Yunmu breathed a sigh of relief. That was because not long ago, he had finally seen the elder of the Origin God sect who hadn't expressed anything until then finally raise his name flag after some hesitation. Even when Li Yunmu had shown so much, the old man hadn't made his decision easily. Who knew what sort of qualifications did his Origin God sect have when looking for disciples that he had to think so long about it? If Li Yunmu hadn't displayed his cross-cover armor, revealing the clear black patterns, then probably that elder of Origin God sect still wouldn't have considered him. Only then did Li Yunmu come to understand that the test set by Underground Serpent to accept him as member wasn't as simple as it had seemed. Although being recruited by a second-tier sect was difficult for ordinary disciples, but for Li Yunmu, it wasn't much of a problem. However, he had been mistaken. Although Origin God sect was a second-tier sect, Underground Serpent was spying on it. The latter was one of the top-class first-tier powers, so how could the deal be so simple? Fortunately, Li Yunmu had still obtained the acknowledgement of the elder. Thus, the mission assigned to him could be considered completed. He had smoothly passed the entrance exam of Underground Serpent and had successfully become a silver-ranked member of the organization. On top of that, what concerned his main aim, more than half of it had been achieved as well. He had already obtained the method to cultivate 2 of the 3 final flux points. After successfully becoming a disciple of a second-tier power, he would immediately obtain the method to cultivate the 106th flux point. After successfully becoming a member of Underground Serpent, he would naturally also obtain another flux point. As long as he successfully became a core disciple of Origin God sect, he could obtain the cultivation method of the final flux point. Besides that, if he upgraded to become a gold-ranked member of Underground Serpent, he could obtain the final flux point in this way too. After figuring everything out, Li Yunmu was greatly exalted. He didn't pay any attention to the tier-jumping battle of Profound South Sect, and after another day, the intersect battles were finished. Li Yunmu successfully obtained the 30,000 contribution points delivered to him by a person from the sect. After that, the sect master specifically invited him to take a trip through Profound South Sect so he could learn to which second-tier sect he wanted to go. After a careful observation, Li Yunmu could make out that 19 second-tier sects had arrived that day. Apart from the 6 resembling Flying Snow Mountain sect which had special regulations for recruitment like only accepting women, the other 13 sects had surprisingly invited him to join them. Li Yunmu chose Origin God sect without any hesitation, shocking the master of Profound South Sect. Qingyang, there are 13 second-tier sects here, so why did you choose Origin God sect? The sect master's expression sunk. From that, it was obvious that he wasn't happy with Li Yunmu's choice. Sect master, could it be that there's some problem with this Origin God sect? Li Yunmu naturally wouldn't say so, but he had no plan to change his choice because of Profound South Sect not liking his decision. Chapter 468 Exposed. Sect Master, could it be that there's some problem with this Origin God sect? Li Yunmu naturally wouldn't say so, but he had no plan to change his choice because of Profound South Sect not liking his decision. There's no problem. The sect master of Profound South Sect, who was also Liu Tingting's father, Liu Zhen, shook his head. Clearly, the third-tier sect's sect master knew much more about the situation of Origin God sect than Li Yunmu. But the two sects had friendly relations, and the other party was a sect of a higher tier. He pursed his lips and didn't say anything in the end. Liu Zhen paused for a while before saying, although there isn't any problem, the rules of the Origin God sect are a little strange. I advise you to consider your choice carefully and pick another second-tier section. Li Yunmu had gotten information about Liu Zhen from Underground Serpent long ago. He was a sect master who tried to never offend anybody. He liked to cultivate peacefully, without caring about managing other matters. It could be said that the reason why he had become the sect master was because of Profound South sect's elders pushing this position onto him. With that kind of personality, there was naturally some reason behind sect master's words. Li Yunmu wanted to inquire further, but Liu Zhen shut his mouth and did not speak any more. In the end, Li Yunmu departed without changing his choice, still determined to infiltrate Origin God sect. Liu Tingting came out from inside the palace and gazed at Li Yunmu's disappearing back. She asked with a serene expression, "Daddy, why didn't you stop him from entering Origin God sect? Didn't you see him leave? He's a person who has his own strong views." He had already made his decision, Liu Zhen answered while shaking his head. He deeply looked at his treasured daughter and added in a slightly lower voice, "Ting Ting, he isn't the same Lin Qingyang as before." "What? Daddy, I don't know what you're speaking about. I will go back." Liu Tingting began to panic after hearing this and left the palace hall in large strides. Liu Zhen saw his foolish daughter leave and let out a long sigh. After walking out of Profound South Hall, Li Yunmu went down the main peak. Before long, Liu Tingting ran over, catching up with him. The strange thing was that she wasn't like her usual self, babbling nonsense without any meaning just to attract his attention. Rather, she was walking just behind him, following without a word. Li Yunmu tried to catch a glimpse of her from the corner of his eyes and saw that the silly girl was concentrated on his body. Li Yunmu was quite unfamiliar with this type of circumstances. Not long ago, Wang Yan had also been acting foolish like Liu Tingting. But the difference was that Wang Yan was infatuated with Li Yunmu while Liu Tingting was attached to Lin Qingyang who had died long ago. Thus, Li Yunmu felt greatly uncomfortable. But it didn't matter. The tear-jumping battle had concluded and he had obtained what he wanted. He planned to leave with the elder of Origin God sect the next morning. When that time came, Liu Tingting's matter would also be concluded. At that moment, Li Yunmu's mind was still focused on the words of Profound South sect's sect master. He had wanted to say something but then hesitated, which made it clear that there was some hidden trouble which he was finding hard to mention. This cast a shadow over Li Yunmu's heart. He knew that Origin God sect had many concealed secrets, otherwise, it wouldn't have caught the attention of Underground Serpent. But Li Yunmu had already made his decision that regardless of anything, he would enter Origin God sect. It wasn't just to finish the mission of Underground Serpent, but also to obtain the method to cultivate the final flux point as quickly as possible. Moreover, he had another reason which forced him to follow through with his choice. That reason was that he had discovered that Origin God sect surprisingly had a part of meridian nurturing flux point technique. This made him even more determined to infiltrate that place. But it appeared that Origin God sect was probably a sketchy region. Li Yunmu had a premonition that he was entering the center of a whirlpool. Suddenly, Liu Tingting who had been following behind him spoke up. "What are you thinking about?" Li Yunmu was startled, but immediately replied with a wooden expression, "I'm not thinking anything." "You seem to be afraid of something." "Nothing." "Then why did you choose to go to Origin God sect?" Liu Tingting asked. "Who doesn't want to enter a second-tier sect?" Li Yunmu retorted. "But Origin God sect isn't any ordinary second-tier section." Li Yunmu's thoughts began to move, and he said, "How is it not ordinary? What's so different about it? You yourself should know the answer." "It's presently a whirlpool," Liu Tingting said while watching his expression attentively. Li Yunmu went silent, no longer paying any attention to Liu Tingting. She stayed quiet as well for a time before suddenly asking, "Is he still okay?" Who? Li Yunmu had no idea what she was speaking about. The Lin Qingyang whom I knew. A hint of sorrow appeared on Lu Tingting's face. Dead long ago. At that moment, Li Yunmu realized that the woman had seen through his facade long ago and hadn't been trying to test him. Thus, he might as well honestly reply to her. Soon, he discovered that the sound of footsteps behind him had disappeared. He had a profound sensation that Lu Tingting was still standing at the same spot since hearing his words. Li Yunmu shook his head and thought to himself, death is also good. If Lin Qingyang hadn't died, then based on the information about him provided by Underground Serpent as well as Lu Tingting's infatuation, he probably wouldn't have had a good ending. This was also good for Lu Tingting, but naturally she wouldn't think like that. Li Yunmu had some understanding about why Lu Tingting hadn't exposed that he was a substitute, why she hadn't tried to take revenge for Lin Qingyang, and why she didn't hate him. Perhaps, it wasn't that she hadn't thought about, but that she didn't dare to do anything. Maybe for her dad or for the entire Profound South sect, she hadn't done anything. This was the disparity between first and third tier sects, not to mention that Underground Serpent was one of the top-class first-tier powers. Not much later, Li Yunmu returned to his room where a lot of familiar fellow disciples of 21st Residential Region had gathered to greet him. But seeing his cold expression, all of them made some excuses and retreated. Li Yunmu didn't need to entangle himself with Profound South sect anymore or to care about maintaining a good relationship with others. Besides, Li Yunmu had no need to even impersonate Lin Qingyang anymore. There was no one who would be willing to impersonate others, only those who regretted their own existence. Clearly, Li Yunmu wasn't that type of person. At night, he took out a unique contact wood from Underground Serpent, which was a small human figurine. The height of the carving wasn't greater than 10 centimeters, and a layer of black energy covered its whole body. There was a clear mark on its body, which was an underworld hydra. That was right, this was a piece of wood which could make contact with Underground Serpent. Li Yunmu picked it up and applied a little force to make a cut on his finger. He dropped blood onto the figurine, which brought the human carving to life. It gazed at Li Yunmu with rapt attention. After a long while, it had collected the whole message. The next moment, it nodded and transformed into a black shadow that quickly disappeared into the distance. Chapter 469 Great Surprise. Li Yunmu had informed An that his identity had been exposed by Lu Tingting and possibly even Lu Zhen. But because of his intuition, the final part of his report said that the other party didn't seem to be thinking of taking any action to expose his identity. In a bit over half an hour, the humanoid wooden carving returned with the answer from An. She told him to not be concerned. As long as Origin God Sect didn't sense anything wrong, he should act according to plan. Her exact words were that Underworld Serpent had methods to keep Profound South Sect silent on this matter. If necessary, even the entire Profound South Sect could be made to disappear. Although Li Yunmu had been mentally prepared, Anne's words had still left him gobsmacked. He could sense that her words, which held the fate of countless people, were filled with killing intent. Just a branch of an ocean city has the power to remove a third-tier sect from existence? Once again, Li Yunmu sensed the terrifying power commanded by Underworld Serpent in the Origin world. At dawn the next day, he walked out of his room. Fortunately, nothing had happened at night. Well, something might have happened, but at least he didn't sense any abnormality in Profound South Sect. Li Yunmu guessed though that Underworld Serpent hadn't needed to take any action since Lu Zhen had chosen to compromise. Lu Tingting appeared again, and he found her presence really strange. She looked at him with a complicated expression. It was so disconcerting that Li Yunmu didn't want to meet eyes with her. "I'm not Lin Qingyang, you should know," he calmly said. Lu Tingting suddenly became emotional and said in a high-pitched voice, "No, you still are. If you want to believe that." Li Yunmu was determined to not pay any attention to this woman anymore. However, when the elder of Origin God Sect appeared, an astonishing scene happened before Li Yunmu. He saw Liu Tingting also about to step onto the Qianxue ship. Li Yunmu stayed rooted to the spot for a long while before asking, "Elder, what's she doing here?" "Oh, you're talking about Liu Tingting? She has been selected as a successor disciple of our Origin God Sect long ago. We came here mainly to bring her back," the elder replied after an indifferent look at Li Yunmu. From the looks of it, Li Yunmu didn't have much importance in his heart. It seemed that even if he decided to recruit this youth in the end, him beating the most powerful inner disciple of Profound South Sect with ease was no great feat. An invitation to Li Yunmu had been extended only on a whim. In an opposite welcome, the elder was extremely cordial toward Liu Tingting. "Come, Tingting, I will first take you to see your room. After we return to Origin God Sect, I will impart the foundation cultivation method of Origin God Sect to you." "Little Yuan, little Bao, you take him to tour this ship. I'm handing Qingyang over to you." Li Yunmu looked at Origin God Sect's elder leading Liu Tingting to her room and narrowed his eyes. Little Bao was extremely friendly and walked to him with a big grin. "Elder brother, don't look at her. Elder sister Tingting's status is different from us. We should pay attention to our matters." Little Yuan and Little Bao were the girl and boy disciples who had arrived with the elder. They were extremely young and should have just stepped on the path of cultivation. Their age was around 14 or 15. Compared to the friendly Little Bao, Little Yuan was extremely curious and was looking at Li Yunmu with puppy eyes. "What are you watching me for?" Li Yunmu asked, feeling weirded out by her gaze. "Hee, elder brother, I'm researching you." Little Yuan stuck out her tongue. "What research? You seem quite ordinary now, but yesterday, how did your body suddenly form that flesh block armor?" Little Yuan's words made Li Yunmu cough blood. "Isn't this little girl pointing out that I'm not normal?" What surprised Li Yunmu most was the fact that she wasn't the least bit shy with him and had grabbed his arm to check it. After she discovered that Li Yunmu's arm was normal and wasn't in an inhuman state like yesterday, she revealed a disappointed expression. With just these two guys to receive him, Li Yunmu could clearly sense the contempt from Origin God Sect's elder. Although Li Yunmu had yet to formally enter, his impression of this second-tier sect declined greatly. The old man who kept putting on airs relying on his age made him feel quite vexed. "Since this is the case, don't blame me later." Yet Liu Tingting was surprisingly the successor disciple of Origin God Sect? How could that be? This was new information obtained by Li Yunmu. Underworld Serpent probably didn't know it, otherwise, with her presence, why would they make him impersonate Lin Qingyang? For a while, Li Yunmu's thoughts were jumbled. Fortunately, he was completely clear about his future actions. Not long after, the Qianxue ship of Origin God Sect finally began to move. It slowly and laboriously rose up. After it reached the height of some 20,000 meters and the buildings could no longer be seen, its speed began to increase. It was so fast that it startled Li Yunmu. "Hee, this is your first time on an ocean-ski ship?" When Little Yuan stepped on it the first time, he also had the same reaction. Seeing Li Yunmu's astonished expression, Little Yuan covered his mouth and began to laugh. "Why aren't we using teleport channels and are traveling with a ship?" Li Yunmu asked in confusion. In the harsh environment of the Origin world, besides those who had entered the Sage realm and could control the sacred deadly might, others didn't have the qualifications to fly in the sky. Even the wings of wind which Li Yunmu possessed couldn't lift him more than 100 meters above the ground, and even then it could only float in the air for a little bit. Everything was because of the tremendous gravity of the Origin world and the suppression of the harsh environment. But the ocean ski ship was an exception, since it could also operate in the sky like the Sage Flux experts. Naturally, the cost of manufacturing such a ocean ship was extremely high. Because of that, only second tier or above could possess them. Yet Li Yunmu still couldn't understand why Origin God Sect wasn't using teleport channels, which were a faster means of teleportation when compared to flying a ship. But this question was quickly answered by Little Bao. Establishing a teleport channel would easily reveal the location of Origin God Sect. Elder brother, can't you understand this? The girl said in surprise. Reveal the location? Why would we need to conceal it? Like Profound South Sect, what's the problem with making your place public? Li Yunmu asked those things, but suddenly his heart skipped a beat. He realized that even such an existence as Underworld Serpent hadn't told him the exact location of Origin God Sect. Could it be possible that even Underworld Serpent didn't know where it was stationed? This discovery made Li Yunmu realize that he had greatly underestimated the second-tier sect. Chapter 470 The Bloodline of 9 Sage Beasts. While Li Yunmu was traveling on the H.A.C.K ship to formally join Origin God Sect as a disciple, in the Kunlun Mountains of his Earth, an important transformation was happening. Yet no one knew about it. In the depths of Kunlun Mountains, there was a valley which would remain concealed by fog throughout the year. Barbarian Niu with his large sledgehammer was looking down upon a group of beasts. Master, the blood of the 9 sages will soon be fused into one. We're only waiting for you to personally bestow it. There were 9 middle-aged men standing at the side of Barbarian Niu. From their faces, it could be judged that they were around 40-50 years old. Their faces were filled with wrinkles which clearly depicted the passage of time. If War God Temple's battle god had been there, he would have certainly been struck dumb. The 9 people who had gathered in the unknown valley of Kunlun Mountains to pay respects to Barbarian Niu were filled with reverence toward him. Very good, old sage beasts. You all did good, but it's a pity. Of the 12 sage beasts, only 9 are here today. 12-3, it's finally perfect, Barbarian Niu said full of regret. He suddenly turned his head and looked toward a woman wearing black training clothes. Shuang Nu, you go. Yes, master. Hearing his words, Ling Shuang leaped casually and fell into the valley where a pond filled with boiling blood could be seen. The 9 sage beasts who had transformed into humans, immediately retreated in 2 rows and successively lowered their heads, not daring to look at her. At this time, Ling Shuang pressed her 2 fingers together and a formless sword energy surged out. Without any hesitation, she stabbed herself in the heart. Instantly, a drop of blood flowed out from her heart. Blood essence from the heart was a rare treasure when compared to normal blood essence. Once it appeared in the air, it went toward the enormous pool of boiling blood as if it had developed intelligence. When it dropped inside, the pool of boiling blood, which was over 100 square meters large, began to cool off as if a freezing medicine had been fed into it. The deep red color of the blood began to grow darker, changing into violet from red. Before long, it turned into deep violet. In time, the whole pond was changed by Ling Shuang. No, it would be more correct to call her Shuang Nu. After Shuang Nu had completed this step, she remained silent and gazed back toward Barbarian Niu who had been sitting on the highest seat. At this time, he had a taut face, making it impossible to read his expression. But his eyes were cold. He had bought 12 ancient sage beasts in the origin world before descending and prepared everything properly. Once he forcefully entered the new plane and gained consciousness after the world punishment, they could help him accomplish his priorities. But some things happened which weren't part of his plans. He had arrived with 12 ancient sage beasts, but only 9 remained. The other 3 had been killed, the inhabitants of the planet. Imperfect, it was completely imperfect. The difference between lacking 3 and not lacking 3 was like the difference between heaven and earth. This had caused the help he'd prepared for himself to completely lose effectiveness. Because he lacked 3 ancient sage bloodlines, he could no longer refine the body he'd seized. If he treated the insufficient amount of bloodline as a proper nutrient and digested it, it would go to waste. His gaze fell on Shuang Nu. Now he could let her grow a little stronger. Go refine it. You all, assist her in refining the bloodline. Various expressions flickered past Barbarian Niu's face before he finally gave his command. After it, he left without turning his head around. As he walked, his voice was clearly transmitted through the distance. After you have cultivated the sage bloodline, go and massacre those people who killed my 3 sage beasts. His indifferent voice was filled with extreme killing intent. Yes, Qianxue replied expressionlessly. The next instant, she rose into the air and opened her mouth wide. When she inhaled, the liquid in the blood pond of 100 square meters changed into a blood dragon and steadily flowed into her. At this time, the 9 old sage beasts arranged themselves into 2 rows on her sides before forming a circle. They then extended their hands to provide her with the bloodline energy of their bodies. 1 day passed, then another and another. After 3 days, the 9 ancient sage beasts turned into old men from middle-aged ones. But in exchange, the presence of Qianxue, who had been assisted by then, had grown much more terrifying. At the dawn of the 5th day, the 9 old sage beasts finally pulled back their hands simultaneously. Their wrinkles had deepened by a lot, and their vitality was much lower than before. Congratulations, young master, in successfully cultivating a divine bloodline. The 9 old sage beasts said together. Divine bloodline. Qianxue's voice was even colder than before. Clearly, she didn't approve of this divine bloodline. If the 3 sage beasts hadn't died and their bloodline could be fused with that of the others as well as a drop of God undercurrent's blood, it would have formed a genuine divine bloodline. But they lacked 3 sage bloodlines, and so the difference was great. Never mind. Even if it's not perfect, the quasi-deities of Earth won't be able to restrict me given my strength. Qianxue indifferently looked at the sky above. The mist which enveloped this valley without scattering for the years seemed to be non-existent in her eyes. Who were the people behind the killing of your 3 companions? She asked after returning her gaze to the beasts. Reporting to young master, the bloodline of Chao Tian Undying Bird had fallen into the hands of Chao Tian sect, who considered it as the foundation of their sect, one of the 9 sage beasts replied. Profound Underworld Thunder Tiger's bloodline had fallen into the hands of Bloodline clan of Higher Dimensional Continent, another said. Blue Prison Falcon's bloodline had fallen into the hands of Zhongshan clan of Northern Continent. We've been waiting for a long time for Master to awaken and take our revenge, and this day has finally come, the third said. Although the 9 sage beasts were extremely weak, hatred burned in their eyes. It was a memory which they didn't want to recall. In reality, the sage beast elders hadn't said that at that time, the number of humans who had joined together to attack the 12 sage beasts had contained more than just the culprits they mentioned. But they were fully aware that although their young master had refined the bloodline of 9 sage beasts in her body, she still lacked 3 more bloodlines to make it perfect. Thus, even if they wanted to exterminate the 6 transcending powers and the Fluxer Association as well as all the ruling powers of the 6 continents, it wasn't feasible. Qianxue's strength wasn't sufficient to become an enemy of all the quasi-deities of Earth. Because of that, they could only drop the subject for the time being. Chao Tian sect? Bloodline clan? Zhongshan clan? My body's old memories seem to have a profound impression of Chao Tian sect. We shall begin with that sect first. While speaking, Qianxue walked outside the valley.